What do we really know about the lives that surround us? London, city of light and shadow, where opulence coexists with misery in a daily dance, ignored by those who choose not to see. The cobbled streets, silent witnesses to thousands of invisible stories, destinies that cross without ever truly meeting. But sometimes, in an instant, these separate worlds collide, and nothing will ever be the same again. That evening, the London night was settling in gently. The sky tinged purple above the Victorian rooftops, while the city lights began their nocturnal ballet. In Islington, the restaurant, the Golden Star, a gastronomic institution favored by celebrities and the wealthy, was closing its doors after a particularly successful evening. Bukayo Saka was crossing the threshold, accompanied by a few close friends. The dinner had been exceptional, the atmosphere warm, a perfect evening after an intense week. The footballer, dressed with the discreet elegance that characterized him, exuded the quiet satisfaction of an accomplished man, appreciating the simple pleasures life offered him. "Mr. Saka, it was an honor to have you," the maitre d' slightly bowed, while the valet was already rushing to fetch the footballer's car. It was at that precise moment their paths crossed. A woman, perhaps in her 50s, her features drawn by a fatigue that seemed to go well beyond simple physical weariness. She waited motionless, a few meters from the restaurant entrance. Her worn but clean coat, her hair carefully tied in a tight bun, her hands reddened by the cold, everything about her spoke of dignity, preserved despite adversity. When the last customer had left and the staff began turning off the lights, she timidly approached the back door of the restaurant. "Excuse me," she murmured to the young kitchen porter who was taking out the trash. "Would there be any leftovers that you were going to throw away? I'm not asking for anything more than what would go in the bin." Her voice, soft and educated, contrasted with her situation. Not a hint of pleading, just a simple, almost pragmatic request. The porter, embarrassed, cast an uncertain glance toward the inside. I need to ask the chef," he stammered before disappearing inside. Saka, who was about to get into his car, suspended his movement. Something in this scene had struck him. Not just the woman's request, but her way of carrying herself, this silent dignity that emanated from her. Without really thinking, he addressed his friends. "Go ahead, I have something to do." Surprised, his companions didn't insist. They had known Saka long enough to know that behind his apparent calm lay an unshakable determination. When he had that expression, that fixed gaze, that slightly contracted jaw, it was better not to argue. The porter came back out, this time accompanied by the chef himself, a corpulent man with a ruddy face, visibly annoyed at being disturbed after service. "Madam, we don't do that here," he stated curtly. "We don't give out leftovers. It's against the establishment's policy." The woman simply nodded without protest, without insistence. "I understand. Thank you anyway." She turned on her heel and began to walk away, her thin silhouette outlined in the yellowish light of the street lamps. Her pace was slow but determined, like someone accustomed to refusals but refusing to be defeated. Saka hesitated for a fraction of a second. He could have gotten into his car, gone home, forgotten this incident as fleeting and insignificant in the course of his privileged life, but something held him back. That deep curiosity that had always pushed him to seek understanding beyond appearances. "Wait for the car," he called to the valet before quickly moving away in the direction the woman had taken. He followed her at a respectful distance, far enough not to frighten her, close enough not to lose sight of her. The streets followed one after another, progressively leaving the opulent neighborhoods for more modest areas, then frankly popular ones. The woman walked at a regular pace, sometimes stopping briefly in front of other restaurants, but never lingering long, either because she was refused or because she judged the establishment unsuitable for her quest. As they delved deeper into less affluent neighborhoods, Saka became aware of the vertiginous gap that separated his daily reality from that of millions of anonymous people. He who had grown up in a modest neighborhood in London before his talent propelled him to the heights, felt it like a reminder, a return to roots as brutal as it was unexpected. After almost 40 minutes of walking, they arrived in a narrow street in Tottenham. Weathered buildings lined up, some sporting facades covered with tags, others windows condemned by boards. The woman finally slowed down, approaching a building with a dilapidated entrance door. She entered a code, pushed the door, and disappeared inside. Saka stopped, hesitating. What was he hoping for exactly? Why had he followed this stranger across half of London? As he was about to turn back, to call a taxi and go home, a sound caught his attention. Children's voices, light laughter escaping from a window slightly ajar on the ground floor. Driven by an inexplicable intuition, he approached and took a discreet look through the window partially covered by a worn curtain. What he saw then froze him in place. In a tiny but immaculately kept apartment, the woman he had followed was surrounded by 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, aged about 5 to 10 years. They were pressing around her with expressions of hope on their emaciated faces. "Did you find anything, Mum?" asked the youngest, her large brown eyes fixed on the bag her mother was carrying. The woman gently shook her head, kneeling to be at their height. "Not today, my treasures, but we still have a bit of bread and cheese from yesterday, and I still have a little money to buy milk tomorrow morning." The children's faces showed neither disappointment nor anger, just that resigned acceptance that broke something in Saka. These children were accustomed to deprivation, to absence, to promises unfulfilled by life. "It's okay, Mum," said the eldest, a girl with long black hair and a gaze too serious for her age. "I did my homework with Oliver and Emma. Ms. Harris said I've made a lot of progress in mathematics." But the pride in her voice, that way of highlighting an academic victory to compensate for the failure of her mother's food quest, all of it struck Saka like a blow to the heart. He observed the woman hugging her children, whispering words of encouragement to them, promising them that tomorrow would be better. An obvious question imposed itself on him. Where was the father? What had happened for this family to find themselves in such precariousness? The woman didn't seem to correspond to the usual image of extreme poverty. Her elocution, her dignity, the way she ensured her children's education despite everything. Something didn't fit with the usual cliches. As he was about to move away, troubled by this intimate tableau he should never have witnessed, his gaze caught a detail on the apartment wall. Framed diplomas, one in particular bearing the heading of a major engineering school. Next to it, a photo. The same woman, younger, radiant in academic robes. At that moment, the building's entrance door opened abruptly behind him, making him jump. An elderly neighbor eyed him suspiciously. "Are you looking for someone?" she asked sharply. Saka, caught in the act of voyeurism, quickly sought a plausible excuse. Yes, I think I got the wrong address." The old lady squinted, not fooled. "It's Rachel you were watching, isn't it? Leave her alone, that poor woman has suffered enough as it is." Saka could have walked away, closed this strange episode, but a sudden impulse pushed him to know more. "What happened to her?" he asked softly. The neighbor scrutinized him at length, visibly weighing the pros and cons before answering. Her husband was a biology researcher, a brilliant scientist, apparently. He died of cancer 2 years ago. Everything went up in smoke after that. The insurance that doesn't cover, medical debts, the mortgage on the apartment they had to sell. She was an engineer, had a good position, but she had to give it all up to take care of him during his illness. Then the children. Nobody wants to hire her now. Too old, too long out of the job market, too overloaded with 3 children. The old lady sighed deeply. She does cleaning when she can, odd jobs here and there. She never complains. Her children are always clean, well-behaved, excellent at school. How she manages, God only knows. But the end of the month, she shook her head. The ends of the month are impossible. Saka remained silent, absorbing this information that suddenly gave meaning to what he had seen. This woman hadn't fallen into precariousness through negligence or choice. She had been precipitated into it by a succession of tragic events against which she was fighting with extraordinary dignity. "Thank you," he said simply to the neighbor before walking away. That night, Saka couldn't sleep. Images of this woman and her children haunted him, not as a spectacle of distant misery from which one can turn away, but as a visceral reminder that fate could strike anyone, anytime. This woman had done everything right: studies, career, family, and yet a single stroke of fate had been enough to bring down this seemingly solid edifice. The next morning, after a few phone calls and discreet research, he had a plan. Not a simple almsgiving, not an ephemeral charitable gesture that would ease his conscience without solving the fundamental problem. No, Bukayo Saka had understood that what Rachel really needed was to regain her professional dignity, her independence. He first contacted James, a close friend who ran an engineering firm. "I need you to meet someone," he explained. "An engineer who had to put her career on hold. Don't do me a favor. Evaluate her honestly, but give her a real chance." No. Then he called his financial advisor to set up a particular mechanism, not a donation, but an investment in a back-to-work program for single parents, with particular attention to widows and widowers of cancer patients. A program that would fund refresher training, offer childcare solutions, and support the gradual return to work. Finally, he got in touch with the owner of the building where Rachel lived, a wealthy heiress who neglected many of her properties in working-class neighborhoods. He didn't ask for special favor for this family, but negotiated a comprehensive renovation plan for the building on condition that rents remain affordable for current occupants. 3 days later, Rachel received a letter inviting her to a job interview at a reputable engineering firm. The letter mentioned she had been recommended by a former colleague, a white lie orchestrated by Saka to preserve her pride. The same day, she was informed she'd been selected for a back-to-work assistance program for single parents, including an after-school care solution for her children. Saka could have left it at that, arranged things from a distance, without ever revealing himself, but something pushed him to take one more step to close the loop of this strange encounter. A week after following her through London, he presented himself at the door of her apartment, simply carrying a grocery bag. No ostentatious gifts, just quality fresh products, the kind of things a family in their situation probably couldn't afford regularly. When she opened the door, Rachel took a few seconds to recognize him. When she realized who was standing before her, her eyes widened in surprise. "Mr. Saka?" Her voice betrayed her disbelief. "Hello, Mom," he said simply. "May I come in for a moment?" Still in shock, she stepped aside to let him pass. The apartment, just as he had glimpsed it a few days earlier, was modest but immaculate. Books were stacked in every available corner, silent witnesses to an intellectual life that precariousness had not managed to stifle. The children, who were playing in a corner, froze when they recognized the celebrity who had just entered their home. The boy, Oliver, seemed particularly overwhelmed. Saka would later learn that he was a fervent football supporter, collecting articles about his favorite players despite his family's limited means. "I must confess something to you," Saka began, addressing Rachel, who was still observing him with a mixture of confusion and mistrust. "I followed you the other night after the restaurant." He then told her everything: his initial curiosity, the shock of discovering her situation, the research he had done, the initiatives he had taken. He expected anger at this intrusion into her private life, perhaps even resentment for this unsolicited help that could be perceived as condescending. But Rachel's reaction surprised him. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why do all this for strangers?" Saka thought for a moment before answering. "Because your dignity struck me," he finally said, "and because I understood that anyone can find themselves in your situation. Life isn't always fair, is it?" Rachel looked at him for a long time, her eyes shining with contained tears. "No, it isn't," she agreed softly, "but it sometimes offers us inexplicable encounters. She didn't thank Saka, not with words, but the look they exchanged contained something deeper than simple gratitude, a mutual recognition perhaps. The shared awareness that despite appearances, despite the different worlds they inhabited, they were linked by this common humanity that transcends social barriers. The months that followed transformed Rachel's and her children's lives. She gradually regained her place in the professional world she had been forced to abandon. James's company quickly discovered the value of this experienced engineer whose skills had only been dormant. The program initiated by Saka, well beyond this family's particular case, began to produce tangible results for dozens of other single parents. The footballer devoted considerable time and resources to it, not as a publicized charity work, but as a discreet and deep personal commitment. As for Oliver, Rachel's son, he received an unexpected invitation to join the football academy that Saka had just created for young talents from disadvantaged backgrounds. Not through favoritism, the boy possessed real talent that professional coaches had confirmed during rigorous trials, but as an opportunity he would never have had without this fortuitous encounter. 1 year to the day after following Rachel through the streets of London, Saka was sitting in his living room, watching the city light up at dusk through the window. His phone vibrated, a message from Rachel, accompanied by a photo, her and her children smiling in front of their new apartment. Modest but bright, in a decent neighborhood, at a reasonable distance from her new job. The caption simply said, "Sometimes asking for leftovers can lead to much more than a meal. Thank you for truly seeing us." This phrase summed it all up. Saka had done much more than give money or professional opportunities. He had offered something far more precious, a genuine look, devoid of pity or condescension. He had seen Rachel not as a social case or a victim, but as a human being worthy of respect, whose difficult situation was only a temporary circumstance, not an identity. This lesson Saka now carried within him like an intimate treasure. In a world that valued celebrity, wealth, and visible success, he had discovered another form of richness, that of authentic human connections, woven beyond appearances and social conventions. When asked during interviews what his greatest pride was off the field, Saka invariably replied that it was his family, his loved ones. What he didn't say, what he kept as a secret garden, was this deep conviction born from his encounter with Rachel, that our humanity is not measured by our accomplishments or our bank account, but by our ability to truly see others, to recognize their intrinsic dignity beyond circumstances. She only asked for leftovers, he sometimes repeated to himself, like a personal mantra. And she offered me an invaluable lesson. That evening, by his window, contemplating the city where so many destinies crossed without seeing each other, Saka made a silent decision. To always seek to see beyond appearances, to never forget that behind each face lies a complex story worthy of being known. A promise to himself, born of a simple question: would there be any leftovers you could give me? In the years that followed, the program discreetly initiated by Saka became a recognized foundation, helping hundreds of families bounce back after strokes of fate, similar to what Rachel had experienced. Never did the footballer seek to derive media glory from it. It was his secret garden, his way of giving meaning to his extraordinary success. And sometimes when he crossed paths with Rachel at events related to the foundation, they exchanged that special look, that mutual recognition born of an improbable encounter that had changed both their lives. She by regaining her professional dignity and independence, he by discovering a dimension of existence that his celebrity had almost made him forget. Their worlds, seemingly so distant, had been mutually enriched by a simple but profound truth: that true human connection transcends all social barriers, and that sometimes a simple, genuine look can transform entire lives. What remains of this story today? a flourishing foundation that continues to help families in difficulty. A mentoring program where former beneficiaries like Rachel accompany those going through similar trials. And above all, this conviction shared by all who know this story, that our hasty judgments often deprive us of encounters that could change our vision of the world. For at the bottom, isn't this the greatest possible wealth? Not money, celebrity, or power, but this ability to see the other in their full humanity, to recognize their intrinsic dignity beyond appearances and circumstances. She had only asked for leftovers. He had simply decided to follow her. And in this seemingly trivial choice was played out an encounter that reminds each of us of this essential truth, that genuine humanity begins with a look that sees beyond appearances, that recognizes in the other a being worthy of respect and attention, whatever the circumstances.